Okay, I'm going now? Okay. Fairy is a perilous land, and in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold. The realm of fairy story is wide and deep and high and filled with many things. All manner of beasts and birds are found there, shoreless seas and stars uncounted, beauty that is an enchantment and an ever-present peril, both joy and sorrow as sharp as swords. In that realm a man may, perhaps, count himself fortunate to have wandered, but its very strangeness ties the tongue of any traveler who would report them. And while he is there, it is dangerous for him to ask too many questions, lest the gates be shut and the keys be lost. So begins J.R.R. Tolkien's most famous lecture on fairy stories, originally composed and given in 1939 to a class studying Andrew Lang's fairy books. Andrew Lang was a collector. He did not write any of the fairy stories he published, but compiled them from all around the world and published them in 12 different color-coded volumes throughout 1889 and 1910. These stories were well read throughout Britain by young children, including Tolkien himself. But this lecture is only loosely based on Lang's works. It instead focuses on new literary ideas that would redefine the way the world viewed fantasy and fairy stories. At the time of this lecture, Tolkien was in a tough spot. He had published The Hobbit, and it was a success. And the publishers wanted more. Tolkien had begun writing The Lord of the Rings as a sequel to The Hobbit, but it was quickly developing into something far greater. It was not a children's tale, like The Hobbit. It was an epic more like Beowulf than Cinderella. He was fighting the stigma of fantasy. The idea that fantasy and fairy tales were nothing more than bedtime stories related to children, short moral tales about diminutive creatures who try to be funny and fail or try to moralize and succeed. The Lord of the Rings was the culmination of everything he had done up to this point, yet it seemed it could never be anything more than a tale for the nursery. In this lecture, he isn't just arguing to convince the world that it could be something more, but also himself. To convince himself that the world would see it as it truly was, not a moral or an analogy to its children that if they behaved, they would be rewarded, but as a poignant reflection of our world, the art and divine right of the sub-creator. The idea of the sub-creator is one first introduced by Tolkien in this lecture, and is one of the reasons it is so remarkable. In order to understand sub-creation, it's important to remember that Tolkien was a devout Catholic, and therefore believed that man is created in the image of God. Sub-creation, then, is self-explanatory. We, as human beings, are sub-creators in everything we do, emulating the creative genius that created us. Fantasy remains a human right. We make in our measure and in our derivative mode, because we are made, and not only made, but made in the image and likeness of a maker. Or, in the words of Tolkien's poem Mythopoeia, "Dear sir, although now long estranged, man is not wholly lost, nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. Man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white, to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sowed the seed of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. That right has not decayed, we make still by the law in which we're made." Thus, Tolkien argues that fantasy as a genre is the result of a divine right that each of us possesses as children of God. But then, why do people struggle so much to accept it as a valuable contribution to the literary world? The difficulty arises when you try to make it believable. Think about an adjective. The greatest thing that ever happened to fantasy was the ability to describe it. The mind that thought of light, heavy, gray, yellow, still, swift, also conceived of magic that would make heavy things light and able to fly, turn gray lead into yellow gold, and still rock into swift water. If it can do one, it can do the other, and inevitably it did both. It's easy, for example, to take green from grass and stick it in front of sun to get a green sun. But to create a world in which a green sun makes sense, that's where things get tricky. And that is why fairy stories, on the whole, have failed for so many. Willing suspension of disbelief has been defined as a willingness to suspend one's critical faculties and believe the unbelievable. But Tolkien argues that this term is insufficient when it comes to fantasy. If the author has successfully created a secondary world, then there should be no disbelief to suspend. We are capable of literary belief when the story maker's art is good enough to produce it. That state of mind has been called willing suspension of disbelief. But this does not seem to me a good description of what happens. What really happens is that the story maker proves a successful sub-creator. He makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of the world. You, therefore, believe it while you are inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken, the magic, or rather art, has failed. You are then out in the primary world again, looking at the little abortive secondary world from outside. Sub-creation plays an especially large role in fantasy. Tolkien argues that the successful creation of a secondary world requires the utmost skill and thought in order to make it believable, making it one of the most difficult crafts, and therefore it should receive more credit and attention from those who are capable of conquering such a task. If this had been done, then fantasy and fairy story would not have been in the state that they were. Tolkien urges the remedy in his lecture and argues that fantasy is not and should not be merely for children. If fairy story as a kind is worth reading at all, it is worthy to be written for and read by adults. Tolkien proved that indulging in such fantasies was not only trying to escape and neglect the real world, but the act of such an escape was not incorrect. In his words, I have claimed that escape is one of the main functions of fairy stories, and since I do not disapprove of them, it is plain that I do not accept the tone of scorn or pity with which escape is now so often used. Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home? Or, if he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jailers and prison walls. Tolkien succeeded in redefining fantasy, creating the genre as we know it. He finished writing The Lord of the Rings, and it was an even greater success than The Hobbit. He successfully created a secondary world, and it was accepted by a world and people who had hitherto rejected tales of this kind as immature and suitable for only those too young to recognize that such things were impossible. And that is why he is referred to as the father of modern fantasy. The end.